Hello, this is our Logic tutorial. We've opened up a new Logic project. This is what it looks like with the holy white light, etc. Gonna choose a software instrument, hit create. This is what it looks like in the very beginning. We're gonna go through the basic windows and some of the basics within them. Here on the left, we have sound sources. These are MIDI instruments, all in-house from Logic. It's important to remember that all of these are synthesizers. So a studio horn, a mallet, a guitar, a bass, synth basses, vintage clavichords. They're all synthesizers set to different things with different knobs turned different ways and effects applied. Pretty amazing what they can do in MIDI. So this is a MIDI track. If I hit Command Option S, we'll create another one. If I hit Command Option A, we get an audio track. Now I'm coming through on the mic, which I'm speaking through. It's detecting the audio. We're going to do this whole thing without audio because I'm not really sure how to have the audio within Logic being recorded while my voice is also being recorded externally. It doesn't really matter, actually. I think having the sound off is better. We can just focus on, me. Okay. Just kidding. The learning. And if I hit Y, it'll get rid of the sound window. This one here on the left, bring it back. This is our channel strip. This is all modeled off real hardware. Logic is basically trying to emulate a giant studio desk. This is one channel strip. So all these things that we'll go through are lined up in such a way that it's kind of like using a giant studio console desk. If I hit X, this brings our mix window. We have all these channels. It starts to look like a real studio desk, especially once you add more and more tracks. Let's get rid of this for now and go through the details here from bottom to top. This is audio 1. Displayed right here, highlighted. If I change it to there, now we have the MIDI one. This is generally, here on the right, this is going to be generally the stereo out, as it says. Sometimes it's a bus track we'll get into later if you had that highlighted. The stereo out is where all the signals are being routed to from every track. Go straight to the stereo out. This is essentially the song right here. You can add in audio effects, EQ, do other things directly on this. That's basically getting into the realm of mastering, and these days you can master as soon as you open the project if you want. People often like preload compressors and stuff onto their mastering bus. I don't really do that though. Okay, let's go back to the audio and use that one. Mute mutes the channel. Solo, that's just M and S on your keyboard. This is the volume fader. I believe this R means it's record enabled and input monitoring is on. Now it is. We're getting feedback. Okay. This is the fader. One thing to keep in mind with faders that I actually learned just recently is that, but I think kind of intuited earlier, is that the fader is actually much more sensitive at the bottom. It's a really good idea if you can to regulate your signal, even if you want something to be really quiet, to have the fader be closer to the top or the middle, where the fader is actually less sensitive, and it means you have sort of more give and you can find more exactness in terms of the volume. Down here, it works so sensitively that, just moving it a little will change the volume a lot more. So it's kind of a mixing technique that gets more into the advanced realm, but keeping the fader near the top is good, and you do that by essentially reducing the signal going into the fader. Let's see. I believe. La 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 la. Ha. Oh. I'm not getting more peak volume. So I think this is our peak level. Yes, it says peak. This is our volume. This is where it's set. So volume fader will change that. This on the right is the peak volume, which means it's displaying the loudest I've ever been right now with my voice coming through. top volume is 0. So if it gets to 0, then you're sort of technically at the top. In old analog gear, it was really good to push that as high as you could go for a couple of reasons. Often you get more distortion out of the physical equipment that could sound really good. Also, equipment has like a natural amount of noise, which you call a noise floor. If you pay attention to recordings, there's often like kind of hiss and stuff. Even in more modern recordings, you even have a little bit of a noise floor in the digital realm, I think, at times. But in the analog world, it was a real thing. The idea is that if you could record really loud and push the volume as high as possible, you'd reduce the percentage of that noise floor, because that floor will always sort of stay. So if you're recording really quiet, you're going to get a lot of like the hiss from your equipment. So it's ideal to record loud. Now in digital spaces, we want to keep things below 0. Anything over 0 is considered clipping. Instead of distorting nicely, digital signal tends to sound shitty. I mean, it's a matter of taste, but basically it does not distort the way that real mics recording onto tape used to. Getting a little tape distortion can sound amazing, and it's in tons of music, and there's lots of ways to fake that in the digital realm. The way you don't do that is by going over 0. Your whole goal is to stay below all the time, which means even in the beginning you want to give yourself more room. Negative 4.4 is decent for a single track. Here on the stereo, we're only at negative 15.4, so tons of room. We're doing good. This is the pan, left or right, for that track. This read is for automation. It's set to read. Can set it to touch, latch, right, etc. They do different things. If you have equipment, you can program in automation. What automation is for is to change your parameters over time. That's why it's automated. So often on volume, if you want something on this track to get louder or quieter, you can get into that. Right now it's set to read, which means it's going to do what the fader is doing, which is sitting. We haven't automated anything in. If I hit A, I open up this automation kind of scenario, and you can change things. We'll get into that some other time. Group. There's some way to group tracks that I'm not fully aware of. Cool. Stereo out. This is being sent to this stereo out track right here. That's what that means. It literally means, it says stereo out. It's because the signal is being sent here, like all the tracks will be, unless we change that, which we won't. These are sends. So this is for having buses created. We'll get into that later. And then that would be the volume of the bus. Again, we'll show you more on that later. Audio effects is where you directly load in a compressor, a reverb, distortion, a million plugins you can get. This is all modeled, like I said, off real hardware. This is a channel strip in a big studio desk. They might have like 44 or 60 plus channels for recording, like they do back in the day, or Chris Lord-Alge does now. And it's a lot of fun to use equipment like that, I'm sure, but it's also fairly inflexible. This is super flexible in that instead of having like some stock compressor loaded into my channel strip, I can choose any of the things that come with Logic to load in, or I can go audio units and do third-party stuff like waves, all sorts of things. I can load anything into here, and it'll start working on this channel. Another way to do that is to create a bus. We'll get into that later, and that's where you'd be sending signal to something else that has that effect. Input 1 is designating how you record into it, so it's set to the input 1 on my recording device. I believe it'd be like my little audio box. Point is, it's working, but you could change it to input 2, because the that's right, the little audio box that I have with the volume knob that you plug everything into, including a mic or a guitar, the DI is set to input 2, so it's set to the input 1, which is currently the mic. They have an EQ built in. This is a parametric EQ. This is what it looks like. We won't get into it. You can turn it on or off. And you see that it populates that as an effect once you've turned it on. EQ, they have that built in here, you can load other EQs if you choose. This is the one that Logic has built in stock on every channel. It's called parametric because it's got the whole graph thing. Lots of EQs, especially on physical equipment, have knobs, which means you're using more of your ears because you're not looking at something. You usually have less flexibility, so it's like a trade-off. This is sort of the new school. Settings, who knows? There's more settings up here that do things. We don't need to get into that. Adding swing, quantization, all that stuff we can do later. Remember, hit Y to get rid of the sound window. I toggles our channel window. Okay, so now we're in the project. Let's keep I there, actually. We're in the project. I'm gonna full screen this bitch. All right. We've got a couple of tracks. Let's get rid of this one for simplicity's sake. Let's keep in mind here, it has these buses already set up. Let's open this mix window. Inexplicably, Logic loads this MIDI instrument, vintage electric piano, which, by the way, we can select various synthesizers. This is sort of the more direct way to choose what thing you're actually using. So you notice that it may have its own sound, classic electric piano, which is what they're calling it, but really it's this thing. It's a deluxe classic synth thing. You can use this to make different sounds. You can turn all these knobs, and instead of choosing different sounds, which may or may not change the synthesizer being used, I can directly choose synthesizers, and they have other things too. Or I can choose third-party things. Ooh. Holy baby. Like, X for Records. Oh, Serum. That's a cool synth. Etc., etc., etc. Why they have, this is the inexplicable part, why they have it loaded on bus 4 and bus 3 in that order, with bus 3 turned to 20 to 25% or so. Could turn it up. No one knows. I'm going to delete them. But see, each of these buses comes preloaded with a chorus turned off, some space D, which is a reverb thing, and channel EQ turned on but not doing anything. Why? Why have the bus at all? And then why have it be 3 and 4? It's like so silly. So silly. Delete. And while we're at it, no send. Just to clean up. No send. I like cleaning up. It's good. I'm going to turn this off too. No plugin. Okay. So let's have this audio track. What are we doing? Sends. Now, I'm going to create a send by adding a bus, which is essentially jacking a cable from this track over to this bus. Now, nothing's going on here. We can have this electric piano also go to this bus. This is going to be the very basics of mixing and what this window's for. Piano names audio aux 1. Aux track you cannot record into, unlike a MIDI or an audio track. You can't record directly into this, but you can have the signals of any track go into it. And in real life, what you would be doing is taking a cable and plugging it from one of these tracks into the bus. And then you'd have another cable patching from this bus, as you call it, to the stereo out. Everything eventually ends up in the stereo out. And that's through cables that you're patching through in the real life world. This is digital. Let's clean up, get rid of that. All right. So we have nothing going on. You don't need to put effects here. There can be reasons why you would just want to bus things into one location. Let's say you might have heard the term drum bus. That would be one track that's collecting all of the separate tracks within the drums. You often record many parts of the drums on different tracks. You'd have a kick track going through one mic. You'd have a mic for the snare, maybe multiple mics. You'd have room mics to give the atmosphere of the drums, some hats and cymbal mic. You can have like 5 or 6 mics on a drum, easy. Each one would be being recorded into a separate track, or you can have two mics on one stereo track. But let's say you want to have one compressor or one volume control for the entire drum set. Well, then you bus all of the drum parts to one track, and then you can manipulate as a whole on that one track. So instead of putting a compressor on each part of the drum on their track, what I'd be doing is putting a compressor, which you might also do, but it might be nice to have a compressor on that drum bus, and what that will help to do is glue the sound together, probably. A lot of things you can do. You might add a reverb onto the whole drum. So many things that can be done with mixing. Again, just as a reminder, good to keep your volumes mid to top if you can. If you don't know how to change that, no big deal. It's just good for the right practices. Gain staging is sort of the art of having your signal be at the proper stages, be at the proper level through the various stages of its life. So you might actually be running, like you record your mic, your voice through your mic. That's part of the signal. The mic itself adjusts the signal, has a certain sound, captures certain frequencies. Then it gets put into the DAW, and well, first of all, it goes through your channel box, your audio interface. That imparts a certain character. Then that gets into your computer. The DAWs don't matter, I don't believe, but in real life hardware stuff sure would. And then if it goes through any plugin, that imparts character. We'll get more into these details later. But gain staging is the art of having essentially your volumes on the signal be at the right place, because certain pieces of hardware prefer not to be overloaded, but also want to have enough load going in. I think we're going off into the weeds a little, so we'll pare it back and get on the path. So X, get rid of this mix window. Let's go over some of these things up top real quick. Right now, we can switch this. Oh, that's how that works. Or I can have both. So this is our traditional project window. This is a sequencer window, which Logic just added. If I hit O or click here, we get the Logic loop library. If I want to have 30 third-party loops loaded in, I hit here and go to all files, and I can find the files on my computer somewhere. I have them load them in. Let's go back. Keep in mind that third-party loops often have a built-in time signature and key, which can be adjusted and manipulated in more complex ways if you need to on audio, but the flexibility is often not within the sample. In other words, if it's at 120 BPM and in the key of A sharp, that's where it's going to stay when you drag it in, no matter what your project settings are. Unlike Logic loops, which adjust, even though it displays a tempo here, that's only what it's really, like, quote, recorded at. But if I drag it into the project, it'll adjust the tempo and the key to what I have set up here. So it'll, to the best of its ability, adjust to C major and 4/4 and 120. So the sequencer is a way to drag in, say, a loop. And now I have it here, and I can hit play. You can hear it stop. Keep in mind, the sound is still going through in the project. I paused here, but if I hit stop up here, that's what stops this. It gets kind of complicated. So I can load in all sorts of samples, and as the project is playing through, hit return, go back to the beginning, hit spacebar to play, record, hit R to record, or I can record into the sequencer. It's essentially different worlds right here. We have a project window and we have a place to record samples. And if you have hardware built for a sequencer, it'll usually have these squares on the hardware, and you can play the samples that you've loaded in, turn them on or off, as the project is playing, so you can have a beat going and then like play in a sample or play a guitar, play a piano, do whatever. And get more into sequencer maybe someday, but honestly, who cares? The project window is the main place. This is where you're going to build your projects. Do this for now. Here it is. Let's cover this top window. So here we have arrangement stuff for the whole project. Like for instance, tempo is set. Right now the tempo is set to 107 up here. It loaded that way in. Usually starts at 120. The sample changed it to 107. So we have that displayed here. It's actually 106.7. Wow, exact. So I can change the tempo over time. So now it's going to get faster here. Command Z does stuff like that. Now it's at 120 again. So Command Z all the way back. You can set markers, arrangement things. You can do in there to basically organize your project if you are so inclined. C toggles the loop window. Now if I hit spacebar, it'll cycle through, and when it gets to the end, it'll cycle back around and keep repeating over and over and over again. Often something you use in mixing because you're trying to get something exact in that particular place, get the sound exactly right, so you play it over and over again. Good idea to remember though, it's not you're always losing a little bit when you listen to something for too long and over again. Great to go off your first instincts. You can toggle that on or off. Looks like it has settings too with the arrow or something. I don't know, maybe not. Hit C, get it off. This window can be made to display various things, be larger, doesn't really matter. This one's important though. I often pull this out just when I'm trying to gauge, the timing of everything. So right now we're at 21 seconds. The song would be 21 seconds if they were this long. Lots of tools. I use these so infrequently, and I should probably know how to do them better. So you have left and right. I think when you hit command, it does one of these, and the other one is just when you're not doing anything. So what is it currently set to? Set to mouse. Nothing. If I change this to the pencil tool, then it's now a pencil. And definitely not going into what all those do. If I hit command, yes, it turns into this thing on the right. So if I hit command, it becomes this. I can change that as well. The grid. So when I'm moving a bunch of things around, see it automatically, sure, import the tempo, 107, whatever. Moving around, it kind of wants to snap to places. And that's because Smart is on. I can turn it off, and now it'll move like this. This is relatively important. Snap regions to relative value, that's what it currently does. So I turn the grid off and I move it and zoom in. It's really not on much of a grid. I turn it on. Now, because it's set to relative value, what it's going to do, if I do the ever important option drag command in Apple Logic World, what I've actually done is dragged it to the exact same place, relative, within that beat. So it's off in the exact same way as this one. And if I try and line it exactly with the grid, sometimes it'll work. Logic can be inconsistent occasionally, but it's often not a good idea. Oftentimes you'll be on the grid and then, right, and you think you've put it directly on, but it's still obeying the relative stuff from this one. And so when you zoom in, oh my god, it's not on. It's actually off, it's ahead. And you can totally get things off and ruin them. It's really important to know that when something is off the grid and you then want it to be on the grid, change it to absolute value, and now it will go exactly to various places. Anything that's visibly shown, you can then easily go exact or even in between. The point is it's thinking about the grid and not where it came from. Hope that makes sense. Don't need to get into these. That makes it taller, shorter, and wider. Skinnier. Anything else to go over? This is the count-in when you hit R or record on an audio or a MIDI track. It'll do it from where the cursor is, and it's set to give, if I turn it off, that's cool, but right now, with it on, it's set to do a 4-beat count-in. The click track will play on those 4 beats and then turn off. If I turn it on, then the click track will go the entire time I'm ever playing anything or recording. There's settings there for that too. I think that about does it to cover the basics here. That's how you get around Logic, where you want to go. Of course, there's things like preferences for audio, which is good to know if you're ever having audio issues or like the recording isn't going through. I want to check out here. Right now, the output and input is set to my ID4, which is the audio box. What do you call it? Audio interface. So it's going to record through there and go out to my speakers through that, which is what I want. You can change things like the buffer size and all that. We won't get into that. With one last thing, we'll say Command All selects everything. Then Command B is a way to bounce MP3 or a WAV file or whatever. Right now it's set to MP3. We have the settings for that. They want it to start at not the beginning of the project, but the first thing that actually is happening, which makes sense. But I could start it in the very beginning if I wanted to, which means I have a bunch of silence in the beginning of that audio file. And okay, and bounce it. I'm not going to do that. All right, toodles. Have a good one. Enjoys. Bye-bye. Ta-ta for now.